Good morning, everyone. Kris here with Inspired Energy. First off, let me apologize for last week. I had computer problems, so I was not able to do a broadcast. Um, so Hartwell got a week off. Good morning, Hartwell.
Good morning, Chris.
Yes. So this morning, the topic that you wanted to get into was the deconditioning process. So, what is conditioning, and how does that work?
Conditioning is something that is always going to happen as a result of us being in each other's auras.
Hmm.
We have openness in our chart, which is where we're more sensitive and where you're curious. And if you're sensitive and curious, you're going to get affected by the world around you.
Hmm.
And that doesn't need to be a problem.
Hmm.
But it often is because we end up learning patterns that are not our own and getting messages from our environment that we should be other than we are.
Right.
And so we shift in order to be more what it is that is expected from us.
Right. So why, there's questions here. So why would we want to decondition? And then my next question is, why are we so resistant to deconditioning when we know the process and we know what's good for us? That would be my next question. So kind of two questions in one.
Well, the reason we'd want to decondition is that so we can be more of ourselves and so that we can have an experience of our lives that feels like our own.
Mm-hmm.
When we're conditioned, we won't necessarily find the right people, the right environments, the right opportunities for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we end up in environments where we feel um, ill equipped to be dealing with those things.
Right.
But if we are living in alignment with our design, then we find the right people, we find the right environments, and the right opportunities come to us. And then our design, our innate gifts, they're exactly what is called for. And so we don't feel ill-equipped. We feel like I'm fully equipped for what it is that I was meant to do.
Mm-hmm.
So wrong environment, you feel ill-equipped, and then that deepens the not self patterns of you because you're trying to, in a sense, be something that you weren't designed to be.
So is that our resistance, is that we get so comfortable with the patterns that we've learned that we feel like it's too much work to unlearn them or something? Like, what is that? Like, because I'm curious as to why, when you know something would be better for you, why you don't do it.
Well, my response is a couple of things there. Um, First of all, a lot of people don't know,
Hmm.
but you're saying, well, if you do know, why is it still a challenge?
Well, is it the integration process of learning systems like this that is difficult for people, or?
Well, this is a deep question. There might be an
Hmm.
aspect of destiny to it,
Hmm.
partly, because human design would say, if you're not resonating with human design, don't engage with it.
Hmm.
It's kind of a catch-22 because I might say, well, a lot of people meet human design.
Hmm.
A lot of people have a bit of an awareness of it, but you still don't seek to apply the suggestions that human design brings.
Right.
So they weren't, from a human design perspective, well, their strategy and inner authority maybe didn't encourage them
Mhm.
to engage with the experiment.
Right, right.
Do you see what I mean there?
Yeah, so then they would follow something that is more in alignment with what their design is in order to activate and to make those conditioning changes, is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. I
Okay.
mean, and there's also that phrase, don't know where it came from, but
Yeah.
many are called, but few are chosen.
Yeah.
So many are called, you could talk about other spiritual paths. You could talk
Mhm.
about the path of yoga, the path of meditation, the call to Christianity, the
Mhm.
call to any kind of what we might consider genuine spiritual paths. And
Mhm.
people don't necessarily engage with those deeply, even though they've become familiar with them.
Right. So how do we go about deconditioning ourselves then?
From a human design perspective, we start to listen. We start to pay attention to our experience. We start to say, okay, does this land? Oh, this seems to be true. Oh, okay. And then if we feel that if it feels right for us,
Mhm.
then we start to apply our strategy and authority more consistently.
Mm.
So it's like, oh, for generator, you start to, okay, I'm not going to initiate in my life. I'm going to trust and experiment and see what happens when life comes to me, and
Mhm.
then respond based on that and see if that brings me more satisfaction. See if that does seem to create the flow in my life.
Mhm.
So you got to prove it to yourself. I mean, there's so many things that appear true right away in human design, like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Oh my God,
Mhm.
that makes so much sense. So hopefully that invites a person to say, okay, maybe I should, maybe I should really devote myself to this deconditioning process.
Mhm.
So in human design, we would say every cell in your body is replaced in 7 years.
Mhm.
So the deconditioning process takes 7 years at least.
Mhm.
And it's a gradual process where we let go of not self behaviors. Um, but first, you follow your strategy.
Mhm.
And only when you're following your strategy do you actually have the chance to hear the voice of truth inside you, the voice of your inner authority.
Mhm.
For instance, if you're a generator and you're always trying to initiate, then you're never going to be responding. And if you're not responding, you're not going to hear the voice of your inner authority, which for you, I know, is your emotional clarity.
Mhm.
If you're always initiating rather than responding, you're not going to hear that emotional clarity. You're not going to have an experience of that.
Right. So, are there other things besides the strategy and authority that we can do to go back to our authentic selves and become more in alignment?
Well, we meet people. I
Mhm.
meet people as a human design analyst who seem to be functioning in quite a powerful way. And then looking at their chart, we see, okay, I feel like I'm doing some of that already. I feel like I'm doing some of that already.
Mhm.
So keep in mind that on one level, you can't not express your design
Right.
because your design is um, what your design is revealing is your auric signature.
Mhm.
So you walk into the world, and what is impacting other people? What's impacting other people is your definition.
Mhm.
So in some ways, there's no way not to be yourself. And
Mhm.
so um, there might be other techniques and technologies that you have practiced that have brought you more into alignment with yourself.
Mhm.
Maybe you've been, mindfulness practices and you've been practicing for them for years, or doing yoga or meditating.
Mhm.
For instance, if you are somebody who's done consistent meditating, you've probably let go of, you're probably very aware of the not self mind and its influence on you. And you probably let go of maybe a lot of not self influence through that process.
So that's a great segue into the next question. So, what exactly the role does the mind play in conditioning and deconditioning?
Um, the role the mind plays, of course, is that anytime we allow ourselves to be influenced by other people,
Mhm.
um, say you're emotionally defined, and emotionally defined people are not meant to be spontaneous. But you have a lot of people in your life who judge you and say you're not decisive enough.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't you make decisions more quickly?
Mm-hmm.
And so then the not self mind grabs hold of that and says, I should be quicker. I should be more decisive.
Mm-hmm.
And then from the place of your mind, you're trying to be more decisive. You're trying to be now something that you are not. You're
Right.
trying to be something you're not designed to be. Oh, you're undefined in the ego. You're trying to be willful. You're trying to make things happen. You're trying to prove yourself by doing things. And the mind says, I got to prove myself. I got to do this. I've got to do that. And so the mind and the body, the design, if it had its own voice, would be saying, no, you don't have to prove yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You can have high self esteem, and your self esteem should not be based upon what you do.
Mm-hmm.
But the
Exactly.
not self mind has all these ideas now because of the conditioning from outside forces.
So we now pick up this practice of deconditioning, and how do we know we're actually being successful at it? How can we tell that we're applying and using the human design system and deconditioning ourselves?
Well, one way you could tell is if you start to be more clear about how it feels when you are following your strategy. So you'll get better at it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I know what to look for now. I'm practicing waiting for the invitation if you're a projector.
Mm-hmm.
And then I know what it feels like to have emotional clarity at the end of that.
Right.
So you start to be more familiar with your own process, but
Mm-hmm.
also at the same time, you start to notice that, I'm undefined in the head centers. I don't need to be obsessed by other people's questions. And
Mm-hmm.
when thoughts come to me, some of those thoughts are not my own because I'm picking them up from the environment. And I don't
Right.
have to run with them. I don't have to say, oh, it's like, oh, where did that, I can say, oh, where did that thought come from? No, that's not mine. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of following somebody else's thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, it's like, oh, okay. I always used to be, I always used to be triggered, stimulated by other people's thought processes, and that it would engage me in a way that wasn't useful for me. And
Mm-hmm.
I would be trying to be certain about things.
Mm-hmm.
I study a lot of systems. And so I would be trying, oh my God, what this system says this, but this system says that. And I'd be trying to figure it out. And
Mm-hmm.
trying to be certain, and I would trying to lock it in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
You know,
So.
so you begin to notice a freedom arising because you're not
Mhm.
involved in chasing something that you'll never reach, like a greyhound on a race course chasing the
Mhm.
rabbit.
Right. So I think that you were wanting us to both share some experiences about how we've progressed so far after knowing the human design system and working with it. Because
Yeah.
it is a huge system, and once it's like a rabbit hole itself that you go down right when you start looking at it. So, do you want to start off and maybe share some of your experiences?
Well, one thing that made a big difference for me was understanding the emotional wave.
Mm-hmm.
I no longer mostly, I mostly
Mm-hmm.
don't get stressed out when I'm in a particular mood. If I'm in a melancholic mood, it's like, well, there's no reason for that, and I don't give reasons.
Mm-hmm. Right.
See, we're conditioned to give reasons for why we're in a certain state, especially
Mm-hmm.
emotionally defined people.
Right.
And they'll notice that I'm in a melancholic state, and people will say, "Why are you? Is everything okay, Hartwell? Are you okay?"
Mm-hmm.
And I say to them, "Everything's fine, thank you. I'm just
Yeah.
in the low part of my wave."
Yeah.
Because if we go looking for reasons, that's feeding into the not self mind. So there's
Right.
a great piece in that for me.
Yeah. I think for me, a couple of the things that stand out is um, when we looked at the brain. and being left brained or right brained. And left brain people are very detail orientated, very organized. They got all these systems and everything for figuring everything out. And they go like, you know what I mean? And I was never like that. It was always like, okay, here's the information, put it together, get it done. And I just didn't know where the information came from. But it
Mm,
was not something that I always chose to dive deep into. So, like, once I was in it, I wasn't obsessed with it to that point, right? Where I had to have every
yeah.
detail, every bit of information. So that was a big thing for me, as well as the definition of the throat and understanding um, that I'm undefined. So if I'm talking to my partner and he's also undefined, that I need to go and find a space where I can borrow somebody's voice so that he can actually hear me. So that was a really eye-opening thing for me as well. So I'm very conscious of that, um,
Yeah.
as well as the need to respond rather than initiate. Um, but being in Aries, I still like to initiate a lot of times. So yeah, it's hard to pull back the reins. So
Yes.
mhm,
And I mean it it's a slow burn.
mhm,
And some of the things you start to discover are subtle and hard to express, and yet they
mhm,
feel quite real.
mhm.
And I would say they are real.
Yeah.
It's not just in your head,
Mhm,
but it's gradually you feel this um, a return to self,
mhm.
and you start to feel your own uniqueness bubbling up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you start feeling more comfortable in your own skin instead of trying to put more masks and things over top of you, right? Yeah, I think that that's a big thing with the human design system. As you peel away the layers, you start to feel more authentic, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So, well, with that, I guess we should sign off for today. Do you have a topic for next week that people can look forward to, or
Well, what just popped in my head is the root.
mhm, the root?
Because we started our survey of all the gates by
Hmm.
looking at the awareness centers. And
Right.
so we're going to continue that survey. I just, will pop in and out of other topics, but
Yeah.
I think we'll go, and that's what popped into my head is we'll do
Okay.
the root next week.
Well, that's a good place to start. That's our foundation, right? So, for Kris and Hartwell, we would like to say thank you for joining us today. God bless, and we will see you next Wednesday, 9 a.m. See you guys later.